December 18, 1942, Mare Island Naval Shipyard, Vallejo, California. Lieutenant Commander Raymond Thompson stood on the pier examining the heavy cruiser USS San Francisco as shipyard workers swarmed over her battered superstructure. The New Orleans-class cruiser had limped into port 5 days earlier, and Thompson's assignment was to assess battle damage for the Bureau of Ships. He climbed the accommodation ladder and stepped onto the main deck, then made his way to the bridge superstructure. This is worse than the preliminary reports indicated. The bridge wings were completely destroyed. Jagged metal twisted outward where Japanese shells had torn through the 1.5-inch steel plating. Thompson counted the impact points, 15 separate hits on the bridge structure alone. He stepped carefully through the wreckage, noting the bloodstains still visible on the deck plating despite efforts to clean them. The fire control station was obliterated. The chart house showed massive penetration damage. The captain's sea cabin had been vaporized. Thompson pulled out his damage assessment clipboard and began documenting. Bridge, completely destroyed. Primary communication systems, destroyed. Main battery director, destroyed. Radar mast shot away. He paused at the forward section where the captain's station would have been located during combat. 45 hits total, a shipyard supervisor said, appearing beside Thompson. We're still cataloging them all. 86 men killed, including Admiral Callahan and Captain Young. Thompson stopped writing. Captain Cassin Young. Yes, sir. Commanded San Francisco. Killed on the bridge along with the admiral. Thompson knew that name. Every officer in the Pacific Fleet knew that name. Captain Cassin Young had earned the Medal of Honor at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Blown off his ship by the USS Arizona explosion, swimming back through burning oil, saving his repair ship USS Vestal while moored alongside the Inferno. Young had become a symbol of American resilience, proof that even in the chaos of surprise attack, naval officers could think clearly and act decisively. Thompson looked at the destroyed bridge structure again, understanding now what he was examining. This wasn't just battle damage. This was the death site of Pearl Harbor's most famous survivor. Captain Young had spent exactly 11 months and 6 days between earning the Medal of Honor and dying in combat, returning to face Japanese warships again in the darkness off Guadalcanal, this time commanding a heavy cruiser charging directly into battleships at point-blank range. The naval battle of Guadalcanal had been fought on November 13, 1942, in the waters north of Savo Island. American news reports called it a victory. Japanese battleships turned back. Henderson Field saved. The tide of the Pacific War beginning to shift. But standing in the wreckage of San Francisco's bridge, Thompson understood the price. The officers who'd commanded this ship into that night battle hadn't expected to survive. They'd gone anyway. Thompson resumed his documentation, but the numbers took on different meaning now. 45 hits, 86 dead. And among those casualties, the man who'd already proven at Pearl Harbor that he'd rather die than abandon his ship. The journey to that destroyed bridge had begun 21 years earlier, when a young Annapolis graduate first stepped aboard a warship. Cassin Young was born on March 6, 1894 in Washington, D.C., the son of a career Army officer. He entered the U.S. Naval Academy in 1912, part of the class that would graduate directly into World War I. On June 3, 1916, Ensign Young received his commission and reported to the battleship USS Connecticut, one of the great White Fleet ships that had circled the globe demonstrating American naval power. Young served through World War I aboard Connecticut, learning battleship operations in the Atlantic Fleet. After the war, Young's career followed the typical pattern for promising junior officers. He commanded submarine R-23 in 1921, then submarine R-2 in 1923.
The submarine service in the 1920s was dangerous, experimental work. Diesel-electric boats with limited endurance and primitive safety systems. Young distinguished himself, earning a reputation for technical competence and calm decision-making under pressure. Through the 1920s and 30s, Young progressed through the ranks. Lieutenant in 1921, Lieutenant Commander in 1933, Commander in 1939. By 1940, he commanded the repair ship USS Vestal, a 465-foot auxiliary vessel with a crew of 460 men. Vestal's mission was to provide emergency repairs to damaged warships, welding equipment, machine shops, spare parts, technical experts who could fix battle damage or mechanical failures.
It was unglamorous work, but critical for maintaining fleet readiness. On December 6, 1941, Vestal was moored outboard of battleship USS Arizona BB-39 at Ford Island. This was standard procedure. Repair ships tied up alongside capital ships to provide immediate maintenance access. Arizona, one of the Navy's Pennsylvania-class battleships, carried 12 14-inch guns and displaced 31,400 tons. Vestal looked tiny beside her. At 7:55 a.m. on December 7, 1941, Commander Cassin Young stood on Vestal's bridge as Japanese aircraft appeared over Pearl Harbor. The first bombs fell on Ford Island. Young immediately ordered general quarters. Vestal's crew raced to battle stations, but the repair ship carried only light anti-aircraft armament. 8 3-inch guns, a handful of 50-caliber machine guns. Young understood instantly that Vestal's survival depended entirely on Arizona's anti-aircraft fire providing protection. At approximately 8:10 a.m., a Japanese Nakajima B-5N Kate bomber attacked Arizona from high altitude. The bomber carried a modified 16-inch naval shell converted into an armor-piercing bomb. 1,760 pounds of explosives designed to penetrate battleship deck armor. The bomb struck Arizona near Turret 2, penetrated multiple decks, and detonated in the forward magazine. The explosion was catastrophic. More than 1 million pounds of smokeless powder ignited simultaneously. The blast wave exceeded any explosive force previously witnessed in naval warfare, equivalent to several hundred tons of TNT detonating in a confined space. Arizona's forward section disintegrated. The mainmast collapsed. Flames erupted hundreds of feet into the air. The explosion threw Commander Young bodily off Vestal's bridge into Pearl Harbor. Contemporary accounts describe the blast wave as so powerful that men aboard ships 500 yards distant were knocked down. Young survived the fall into the water, approximately 25 feet, but immediately faced a deadlier threat. Burning oil from Arizona's ruptured fuel tanks spread across the harbor surface, creating an inferno that killed hundreds of sailors attempting to escape the sinking battleship. Young swam through the flames. No records document how long this took or how he avoided fatal burns. He reached Vestal's hull, climbed the accommodation ladder, and pulled himself back aboard his ship. The repair ship was on fire, taking on water from splinter damage and drifting directly into Arizona's inferno as the mooring lines burned through. Young took command. He ordered emergency repairs to seal flooding. He ordered fire parties to fight the blazes on Vestal's superstructure. Most critically, he ordered the engine room to prepare to get underway. An extraordinary decision, given that Vestal was still moored to the exploding Arizona and under direct Japanese attack. At approximately 8:40 a.m., with Arizona's magazines continuing to explode and Japanese aircraft still bombing Ford Island, Young ordered Vestal's lines cut and engines ahead. The repair ship pulled away from the battleship's inferno, maneuvered through the chaos of Pearl Harbor under attack, and Young deliberately grounded Vestal on Ahua Point to prevent her from sinking in deep water. Throughout this evolution, Young's crew fought fires, patched holes, and maintained engine power. Vestal survived. Of her 460-man crew, 7 were killed, a remarkably low casualty rate given the circumstances. After securing Vestal, Young and his crew rendered assistance to USS Oklahoma, the capsized battleship moored at Ford Island. Young's men helped cut through Oklahoma's hull to rescue sailors trapped inside, a technically complex operation requiring welding equipment and precise knowledge of the battleship's internal compartmentation. Commander Cassin Young's actions on December 7, 1941, represented exactly the kind of leadership the Navy needed to emphasize in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. He had been blown off his ship, had swum through fire, had returned to command, and had saved his vessel through aggressive action rather than abandoning ship. The symbolism was perfect. American officers wouldn't surrender, wouldn't quit, and would fight back even when literally knocked into the water. On April 18th, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, traveled to Pearl Harbor's repair facilities where USS Vestal remained beached at Ahua Point. The repair ship had been patched sufficiently to allow ceremonies, though full restoration would take months. Admiral Nimitz presented Commander Cassin Young with the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, for his actions on December 7, 1941.
The citation read, "For distinguished conduct in action, outstanding heroism, and utter disregard of his own safety, above and beyond the call of duty, as commanding officer of the USS Vestal during the attack on the fleet in Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii, by enemy Japanese forces on December 7, 1941. Commander Young proceeded to the bridge and later took personal command of the 3-inch anti-aircraft gun. When blown overboard by the blast of the forward magazine explosion of the USS Arizona, to which the USS Vestal was moored, he swam back to his ship. The entire forward part of the USS Arizona was a blazing inferno, with oil of fire on the water between the two ships. As a result of several bomb hits, the USS Vestal was afire in several places, was settling and taking on a list. Despite severe enemy bombing and strafing at the time, and his shocking experience of having been blown overboard, Commander Young, with extreme coolness and calmness, moved his ship to an anchorage distant from the USS Arizona and subsequently beached the USS Vestal upon determining that such action was required to save his ship. 4 days after receiving the Medal of Honor, Young was promoted to captain, an accelerated advancement reflecting the Navy's desperate need for experienced combat leaders. The Pacific War was going badly. Japanese forces had captured Wake Island, Guam, the Philippines, Singapore, Burma, and the Dutch East Indies. The Doolittle raid on Tokyo had provided a morale boost, but strategically the situation remained dire. The Navy needed officers who'd proven they could function under catastrophic conditions, who could make decisions while their ships burned, who understood viscerally that defeat meant death. Captain Cassin Young embodied those qualities. His Medal of Honor wasn't just recognition for past heroism. It was the Navy's declaration that this was the standard expected of all officers. Through the summer of 1942, the Pacific War's momentum began to shift. The Battle of Midway in June destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers and killed hundreds of irreplaceable veteran pilots. The Japanese advance stopped. In August, American Marines landed on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, seizing the partially completed Henderson Field airstrip. The campaign for Guadalcanal became the Pacific War's pivot point. If America held the island, the road to Tokyo remained open. If Japan retook it, the war might drag on for years.
The waters around Guadalcanal became known as Ironbottom Sound because so many ships sank there. The naval battle of Savo Island on August 9, 1942, saw Japanese cruisers devastate an American screening force, sinking 4 cruisers in less than an hour. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons on August 24 saw carriers clash inconclusively. The Battle of Cape Esperance on October 11-12 gave America a narrow tactical victory. But Japan continued reinforcing Guadalcanal through the Tokyo Express, fast destroyer runs down the slot bringing troops and supplies. By November 1942, the strategic situation demanded decisive action. Japanese forces planned a massive naval bombardment of Henderson Field, using battleships. The heavy guns would destroy American aircraft on the ground, allowing troop transports to land thousands of soldiers, retaking the island. Intelligence indicated the bombardment would occur on November 13, 1942. Captain Cassin Young took command of USS San Francisco, CA-38, on November 9, 1942, 4 days before the crucial battle. San Francisco was a New Orleans-class heavy cruiser, 588 feet long, 61 feet beam, displacing 9,950 tons standard. She carried 9 8-inch/55 guns in 3 triple turrets, 8 5-inch/25 guns, and could make 32.7 knots. Her armor belt was 5 inches thick, substantial for a cruiser, but inadequate against battleship-caliber shells. San Francisco's crew numbered 860 officers and men. Young had exactly 4 days to familiarize himself with the ship, the crew, and the tactical situation. He understood the mathematics. Japanese battleships carried 14-inch guns that outranged cruiser weapons and armor that could withstand 8-inch shells at normal engagement distances. In any conventional surface action, battleships held overwhelming advantage over cruisers. The only way cruiser guns could penetrate battleship armor was at point-blank range, under 10,000 yards, where even 8-inch armor-piercing shells could defeat side armor through sheer kinetic energy. This tactical reality would define everything that happened on the night of November 13, 1942. At 1:24 a.m. on November 13, 1942, Rear Admiral Daniel J. Callahan led Task Group 67.4 into the waters north of Guadalcanal. His force consisted of 5 cruisers, heavy cruisers San Francisco, Flagship, and Portland, light cruisers Helena, Juno, and Atlanta, screened by 8 destroyers. Admiral Callahan flew his flag from San Francisco, positioning himself on the bridge with Captain Young. The Admiral's orders were clear: intercept and destroy any Japanese force attempting to bombard Henderson Field. At 1:24 a.m., Helena's SG surface search radar detected Japanese ships approaching from the northwest, range approximately 27,000 yards. The radar operators counted multiple contacts, large signatures indicating capital ships. Admiral Callahan ordered the formation to maintain course toward the contacts. Unlike previous engagements where American commanders had positioned themselves to exploit radar advantage at long range, Callahan drove directly at the enemy force. The tactical situation was developing rapidly. Japanese Rear Admiral Hiroaki Abe commanded the bombardment force. Battleships Hiei and Kirishima, light cruiser Nagara, and 11 destroyers. The battleships carried 14-inch guns and thousands of high-explosive shells intended for shore bombardment. Abe's force had been steaming toward Guadalcanal when radar operators detected the American formation. The Japanese were caught partially unprepared. Their battleships' magazines were loaded with fragmentation shells optimized for destroying aircraft and ground installations, not armor-piercing shells designed for fighting warships. At 1:41 a.m., range had closed to approximately 18,000 yards. Helena's radar maintained continuous tracking. Admiral Callahan ordered formation course changes, maneuvering to position his cruisers for broadside engagement. The American force was outnumbered and outgunned, but possessed two advantages: radar fire control allowing engagement before visual contact, and determination born from understanding what defeat meant. If Japanese battleships reached bombardment positions off Henderson Field, Guadalcanal would fall. At 1:48 a.m., range closed to 12,000 yards. Admiral Callahan ordered, "Stand by to open fire." What happened next remains one of naval warfare's most controversial tactical decisions. Rather than maintaining range and exploiting radar advantage, Admiral Callahan ordered his formation to close at maximum speed. Some historians argue this was intentional. Callahan understood that cruiser fire could only damage battleships at point-blank range. Others suggest radar track confusion forced the close-range engagement. Regardless of intent, the result was identical: American cruisers charging directly into Japanese battleships in darkness, closing to ranges where armor offered minimal protection for either side. At 1:50 a.m., Atlanta's searchlights illuminated a Japanese destroyer at approximately 3,000 yards. Japanese searchlights immediately snapped on, illuminating San Francisco. The night battle erupted with stunning violence. Captain Cassin Young stood beside Admiral Callahan on San Francisco's bridge as Japanese shells began hitting the cruiser. The first salvo struck the mainmast, destroying the SG radar antenna. The second salvo penetrated the after superstructure. San Francisco's main battery opened fire, 9 8-inch guns hammering at Battleship Hiei, which was illuminated by American searchlights at a range of less than 2,500 yards. At ranges this close, naval combat became mutual destruction. San Francisco's 8-inch armor-piercing shells, each weighing 260 pounds, struck Hiei's superstructure and citadel armor. The battleship's thicker belt armor could resist these shells at range, but at point-blank range, the shell's kinetic energy overcame the armor. Hiei's bridge superstructure took multiple hits. Her steering gear was damaged. Fire control systems failed. But Battleship Hiei and heavy cruiser Kirishima were firing back. Their 14-inch shells, each weighing 1,400 pounds, struck San Francisco with devastating effect. The laws of physics were unforgiving. A 1,400-pound shell, traveling at 2,500 feet per second, carried kinetic energy sufficient to penetrate any cruiser armor ever built. At 1:51 a.m., a 14-inch shell struck San Francisco's bridge. The explosion killed Admiral Callahan instantly. Captain Cassin Young died in the same blast. The cruiser's executive officer was killed. The navigation officer was killed. The gunnery officer was killed. In a single salvo, San Francisco's entire command structure was decapitated. The battle continued for another 23 minutes in absolute chaos. Ships on both sides fired at muzzle flashes in the darkness. Destroyer Laffey charged between American cruisers and Japanese battleship Hiei, firing torpedoes at ranges under 1,000 yards before being blown apart. Destroyer Cushing was sunk. Destroyer Monson was sunk. Destroyer Barton was torpedoed and sank in seconds. Light cruiser Atlanta took friendly fire from San Francisco during the confusion, then was hit by Japanese torpedoes and crippled. Light cruiser Juno was torpedoed and limped away from the battle. Lieutenant Commander Herbert Schonland, San Francisco's damage control officer, reached the shattered bridge and found the command staff dead. He took temporary command. Lieutenant Commander Bruce McCandless, the communications officer, had been in the communication spaces below decks when the bridge was destroyed. He made his way topside, assessed the situation, and assumed command as senior surviving officer. McCandless kept San Francisco fighting, maintained course, and continued engaging Japanese warships despite the cruiser taking additional hits. San Francisco fired 878 rounds of 8-inch ammunition during the engagement, more than 100 shells per gun. The cruiser took 45 hits from Japanese shells ranging from 5-inch to 14-inch caliber. In addition to the command staff killed on the bridge, San Francisco suffered 86 total fatalities and 107 wounded. The cruiser's superstructure was wrecked. Her main battery director was destroyed, forcing gun crews to aim manually using local control. Her radar was shot away. Her fire control systems were shattered. But her engines remained operational, her hull integrity held, and her guns continued firing. At approximately 2:13 a.m., the surviving Japanese ships withdrew to the northwest. Admiral Abe's force had failed to bombard Henderson Field. Battleship Hiei was crippled, circling out of control with her steering gear disabled and her bridge shot up. The bombardment mission was aborted. San Francisco limped south toward Espiritu Santo for emergency repairs, steering manually because her helm control was damaged. McCandless maintained command through the withdrawal, keeping the crew organized and damage control teams working. For his actions after the bridge was destroyed, Lieutenant Commander Bruce McCandless would receive the Medal of Honor. On November 14, 1942, American aircraft from Henderson Field, the same airfield that Japanese battleships had intended to bombard, found battleship Hiei still circling northwest of Guadalcanal. SBD Dauntless dive bombers and TBF Avenger torpedo bombers attacked repeatedly throughout the day. Hiei absorbed multiple bomb and torpedo hits. Japanese destroyers eventually scuttled her that evening. The battleship that had killed Admiral Callahan and Captain Young was sent to the bottom by aircraft operating from the field those officers died protecting. The philosophical difference between how America and Japan approached naval warfare revealed itself starkly in the aftermath of November 13, 1942. Admiral Callahan's tactical decision to close to point-blank range was controversial, but it reflected American naval doctrine fundamentally. Officers were expected to be aggressive, to accept risk, and to close with the enemy. American cruiser designs prioritized hitting power and speed. The New Orleans-class heavy cruisers carried the maximum main battery armament physically possible on a 10,000-ton cruiser hull. 9 8-inch guns that could fire 260-pound armor-piercing shells to ranges exceeding 30,000 yards. But American cruiser design also prioritized survivability. San Francisco's armor belt was 5 inches thick, substantial protection against destroyer, light cruiser fire. Her internal compartmentation featured extensive watertight subdivision. Her fuel system incorporated protection against fire and explosion. Her damage control equipment was comprehensive. Most critically, American naval doctrine emphasized damage control training. Every sailor knew firefighting procedures, flooding control, and emergency repair techniques. This philosophy extended to personnel protection. San Francisco's bridge featured 1.5-inch steel plating. Her conning tower, the armored command station intended for use during surface action, featured 5-inch armor. The ship carried modern medical facilities and corpsmen trained in battlefield medicine. American doctrine assumed ships would take damage and planned accordingly. Captain Cassin Young understood these principles intimately from his Pearl Harbor experience. USS Vestal had survived December 7, 1941, specifically because Young aggressively managed damage control. The repair ship took bomb splinter damage and fire damage, but her crew extinguished fires, controlled flooding, and maintained propulsion. Young had learned that aggressive damage control could save ships that seemed doomed. The Japanese approach differed philosophically. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized offensive power at the expense of defensive capability. The long-lance torpedo, Japan's 24-inch Type 93 Long Lance carried a 1,080-pound warhead to ranges exceeding 40,000 yards at 50 knots. Japanese destroyers carried these weapons in massive deck-mounted launchers, sacrificing stability and survivability for devastating first-strike capability. Japanese battleship design followed similar principles. Hiei and Kirishima were Kongo-class battlecruisers upgraded with enhanced armor, but they retained battlecruiser speed, capable of 30 knots, faster than most battleships. This speed came at a cost: thinner armor in critical areas and reduced internal subdivision compared to pure battleship designs. During the naval battle of Guadalcanal, these design philosophies collided directly. San Francisco took 45 hits but survived because her damage control teams sealed flooding, fought fires, and maintained power. Her watertight integrity held. Her structural design prevented catastrophic magazine explosions. Her crew's training allowed them to keep fighting despite command staff casualties. Battleship Hiei took fewer hits but suffered catastrophic damage because multiple 8-inch shells struck her steering gear at close range, an area protected by thinner armor to save weight. Japanese damage control procedures proved insufficient to repair the steering casualty while under continued air attack. When American aircraft found Hiei the next day, her damage control teams couldn't simultaneously fight fires, control flooding, and repair steering. The battleship became unmanageable and was scuttled. The mathematics of this design philosophy exchange were brutally simple. American cruisers were designed to survive being hit, continue fighting after taking damage, and return to port for repairs. Japanese battleships were designed to deliver overwhelming firepower, destroy enemy forces quickly, and avoid extended engagements. Callahan's decision to force close-range night action turned the naval battle of Guadalcanal into exactly the kind of sustained mutual destruction contest that American design philosophy was optimized for, and Japanese design philosophy assumed would never occur. Captain Young's death represented the intersection of American tactical aggressiveness and the inherent vulnerabilities of surface combat. No amount of armor could protect a ship's bridge from 14-inch shells at 2,500 yards. No tactical doctrine could eliminate the risks of charging battleships with cruisers. But American doctrine accepted those risks because the alternative, allowing Japanese battleships to bombard Henderson Field, meant losing Guadalcanal, potentially losing the Solomons campaign, and extending the Pacific War indefinitely. Young had made the same calculation at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Staying aboard the burning Vestal while moored to exploding Arizona was suicidally dangerous. But abandoning ship meant losing the vessel. Young chose risk over retreat, survival over surrender. The same philosophy defined his final moments on San Francisco's bridge. Engaging Japanese battleships at ranges where both sides faced annihilation, accepting death as the price for mission success. The naval battle of Guadalcanal cost the U.S. Navy 2 light cruisers sunk, Atlanta and Juneau, 4 destroyers sunk, Cushing, Laffey, Barton, and Monson, and hundreds of casualties. But Japan lost battleship Hiei, 2 destroyers, and, critically, abandoned the bombardment mission that would have destroyed Henderson Field. Light cruiser Juneau's loss demonstrated the vulnerability of warships damaged in surface action. After taking torpedo damage during the November 13th battle, Juneau withdrew with other damaged ships. On November 13, 1942, at approximately 11 a.m., Japanese submarine I-26 intercepted the damaged American force south of San Cristobal Island. The submarine fired a spread of torpedoes. One struck Juneau in her magazine spaces. The light cruiser exploded catastrophically and sank in less than 20 seconds. Of her 697-man crew, only 10 survived, including 5 brothers from the Sullivan family, though only one Sullivan brother ultimately survived rescue operations. San Francisco reached Espiritu Santo on November 14th, where temporary repairs allowed her to proceed to Pearl Harbor. Captain Young's body was recovered from the bridge wreckage and prepared for burial. Admiral Callahan's body was similarly recovered. Both officers were posthumously retained on San Francisco's rolls until the cruiser reached port, maintaining the naval tradition that a captain commands his ship until relieved by proper authority. San Francisco arrived at Pearl Harbor on November 17, 1942. Captain Young was buried with full military honors. Admiral Nimitz attended the service. The citation for Young's Medal of Honor from December 7, 1941 was read. The circumstances of his death on November 13, 1942, 11 months and 6 days after Pearl Harbor, were noted. Naval officers attending the service understood the symbolism. The man who'd survived America's worst naval disaster had returned to combat and died winning the battle that turned the Pacific War. Admiral Callahan received the Medal of Honor posthumously for his actions at Guadalcanal. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and conspicuous intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty during action against enemy Japanese forces off Savo Island on the night of 12/13/1942. Although outbalanced in strength and numbers by a desperate and determined enemy, Rear Admiral Callahan, with ingenious tactical skill and superb coordination of the units under his command, led his forces into battle against tremendous odds, thereby contributing decisively to the rout of a powerful invasion fleet and to the consequent frustration of a formidable Japanese offensive." Lieutenant Commander Herbert Schonland, who took initial command of San Francisco after the bridge was destroyed, received the Navy Cross. Lieutenant Commander Bruce McCandless, who assumed command and fought the ship through the remainder of the action, received the Medal of Honor. His citation noted, "For conspicuous gallantry and exceptionally distinguished service above and beyond the call of duty as communications officer of the USS San Francisco in combat with enemy Japanese forces in the battle off Savo Island, November 12-13, 1942. USS San Francisco thus carried an extraordinary concentration of Medal of Honor recipients into the naval battle of Guadalcanal. Captain Young had earned his at Pearl Harbor. Admiral Callahan would earn his during the Guadalcanal action. McCandless would earn his for continuing the fight after Young and Callahan were killed. 3 Medals of Honor directly connected to one ship in one battle. A concentration of recognized heroism unprecedented in naval warfare. The strategic consequences extended far beyond individual awards. The naval battle of Guadalcanal prevented Japanese battleships from bombarding Henderson Field, which meant Marine aircraft continued operating from the field, which meant Japanese reinforcement convoys faced continuous air attack, which meant Japan could not sustain the forces necessary to retake the island. Over the subsequent weeks, additional naval engagements near Guadalcanal, the naval battle of Tassafaranga on November 30, 1942, being the last major action, confirmed American control of the sea approaches. Japan attempted one final major naval reinforcement effort. On November 14-15, 1942, the remnants of the bombardment force attempted to escort troop transports to Guadalcanal. American aircraft from Henderson Field and Carrier Enterprise attacked repeatedly. Of 11 Japanese transports, 7 were sunk before reaching Guadalcanal. 4 were beached and destroyed by artillery fire. Japanese forces suffered approximately 5,000 casualties trying to land reinforcements. The operation failed completely. By February 1943, Japanese forces evacuated Guadalcanal entirely. American casualties for the entire campaign included approximately 7,100 killed and 7,800 wounded. Japanese casualties exceeded 31,000 killed or missing. Naval losses on both sides were catastrophic. Each side lost 20 dozen warships sunk in the waters that earned the name Ironbottom Sound. Captain Young's death contributed directly to this strategic victory. By keeping San Francisco fighting after the bridge was destroyed, the ship's continued presence in the battle line forced Japanese ships to divide fire, prevented coordinated Japanese maneuvers, and inflicted the critical damage on battleship Hiei that led to her sinking. Had San Francisco withdrawn when her command staff was killed, as would have been tactically justifiable given the casualties and damage, Japanese battleships might have successfully withdrawn, reorganized, and attempted the bombardment mission on subsequent nights. USS San Francisco received emergency repairs at Pearl Harbor, then proceeded to Mare Island Naval Shipyard in December 1942 for complete reconstruction. Shipyard workers removed the destroyed bridge superstructure, fabricated replacement sections, and rebuilt the cruiser's combat systems. Repairs required 4 months.
San Francisco returned to service in April 1943 and continued fighting through the Pacific War, participating in the Gilbert Islands Campaign, the Marshall Islands Campaign, the Marianas Campaign, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The cruiser survived the war. She was decommissioned in 1947 and sold for scrap in 1959. Before scrapping, San Francisco's bridge structure, the section where Admiral Callahan and Captain Young were killed, was preserved. The bridge is now permanently installed at Land's End in San Francisco as a memorial to the November 13, 1942 battle and the 107 men who died aboard the cruiser during the war. Captain Cassin Young's legacy extended beyond memorials. On September 12, 1943, the Navy launched destroyer USS Cassin Young, DD-793, at the Bethlehem Steel Corporation shipyard in San Francisco. The Fletcher-class destroyer displaced 2,100 tons standard, carried 5 5-inch guns, and could make 36.5 knots. She was commissioned on December 31, 1943, and deployed to the Pacific Theater in April 1944. USS Cassin Young participated in operations throughout 1944 and 1945. She screened aircraft carriers during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. She supported amphibious landings in the Philippines campaign. She operated on radar picket duty off Okinawa in 1945, the most dangerous surface assignment in the Pacific War, requiring destroyers to position themselves between Japanese kamikaze aircraft and the main fleet. On April 12, 1945, kamikaze aircraft attacked USS Cassin Young off Okinawa. One aircraft struck the destroyer's forward superstructure, killing 1 sailor and wounding 59. The ship's damage control parties extinguished fires and maintained propulsion. Cassin Young withdrew temporarily for repairs, then returned to radar picket duty, exactly the kind of aggressive damage control and return to combat that Captain Young had demonstrated at Pearl Harbor. On July 29th, another kamikaze struck USS Cassin Young. This attack killed 22 sailors and wounded 45. Again, damage control parties saved the ship. Cassin Young remained operational and was present in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, when Japan signed the Instrument of Surrender aboard Battleship Missouri. The destroyer remained in service after World War II, serving through the Korean War, and was finally decommissioned in 1960.
In 1978, USS Cassin Young was designated a National Historic Landmark and became part of the Boston National Historical Park. The ship is preserved at the Charlestown Navy Yard, berthed near USS Constitution, where visitors can tour a Fletcher-class destroyer that carries the name of the only U.S. Navy officer to earn the Medal of Honor at Pearl Harbor and die in combat less than 1 year later. The comparative statistics between American and Japanese naval philosophy emerged starkly in the final accounting. The U.S. Navy commissioned 175 Fletcher-class destroyers during World War II. Of these, 19 were sunk in combat, an 89% survival rate. Each destroyer carried approximately 300 crew. The emphasis on damage control, survivability systems, and crew training meant that even destroyers that took severe damage often survived and returned to service. Japanese destroyer losses demonstrated the cost of prioritizing offensive capability over survivability. Of approximately 170 destroyers in 1941, Japan lost 134 by war's end, a 79% loss rate. Japanese destroyers carried superior torpedoes and guns compared to American equivalents, but they lacked comprehensive damage control equipment, modern firefighting systems, and adequate watertight subdivision. Once damaged, Japanese destroyers frequently sank rather than surviving to fight again. Captain Young's two combat actions, Pearl Harbor and Guadalcanal, bookended this philosophical difference. At Pearl Harbor, Young's damage control saved Vestal despite being moored alongside the exploding Arizona, taking bomb splinter damage and catching fire. American design philosophy and training allowed one officer's decisive leadership to save a ship that Japanese doctrine might have abandoned as lost. At Guadalcanal, San Francisco absorbed 45 hits and survived, specifically because American design prioritized survivability. The ship's watertight integrity held, damage control teams maintained propulsion, and the crew kept fighting, despite catastrophic command casualties. The Medal of Honor recipients connected to these two battles numbered 5. Captain Young, Pearl Harbor; Admiral Callahan, Guadalcanal; Lieutenant Commander McCandless, Guadalcanal; Lieutenant Commander Schoenland, Navy Cross for Guadalcanal, and 15 other Pearl Harbor Medal of Honor recipients from various ships. This concentration of recognized heroism reflected not exceptional circumstances, but rather the consistent application of American naval doctrine. Officers and crew were expected to fight their ships aggressively, manage damage effectively, and continue combat operations until the tactical situation was resolved or the ship physically could not continue. Captain Young spent exactly 364 days between earning the Medal of Honor on December 7, 1941, and dying in combat on November 13, 1942. During those 364 days, he received his medal, was promoted to captain, took command of a heavy cruiser, and led that cruiser into the battle that turned the Pacific War. He understood the risks. He'd survived one inferno at Pearl Harbor and knew exactly how deadly surface combat had become. But understanding risk didn't mean avoiding it. American naval doctrine in World War II demanded that officers accept risk as the price of victory. The statistical reality of this doctrine was sobering. Of the approximately 1,200 U.S. Navy officers who commanded major surface combatants during World War II, 67 were killed in action, a 5.6% fatality rate among commanding officers. This compared to approximately 1.8% fatality rates for U.S. Navy enlisted personnel overall. Officers commanded from the bridge, the most exposed location on any warship. They were expected to remain at their stations under fire. They were expected to continue fighting even when their ships were burning, flooding, or surrounded by enemy forces. Captain Young exemplified this standard perfectly. On December 7, 1941, he was blown off his ship and returned. On November 13, 1942, he commanded from the bridge while charging into battleships at point-blank range and died at his post when Japanese shells destroyed the bridge. Between these two actions, he could have requested shore duty, could have accepted a staff position, could have avoided combat commands. He returned to the fight instead. December 18, 1942. Mare Island Naval Shipyard, Vallejo, California. Lieutenant Commander Raymond Thompson completed his damage assessment of USS San Francisco, documenting each of the 45 hits the cruiser had absorbed. The bridge structure where Admiral Callahan and Captain Young died would be completely rebuilt. The fire control systems would be replaced. The radar masts would be reinstalled. The holes in the hull would be welded closed. In 4 months, San Francisco would return to combat, and she would fight through the rest of the Pacific War without losing another captain. Thompson filed his report and left the ship. Standing on the pier looking back at the battered cruiser, he understood what he'd been examining. This wasn't just battle damage. This was physical evidence of the night when American naval officers proved that Pearl Harbor hadn't broken them. It had forged them into something harder. Captain Cassin Young's story contained a profound irony. He was one of 4 Medal of Honor recipients aboard San Francisco during the naval battle of Guadalcanal. He'd earned his medal by surviving Pearl Harbor's surprise attack, swimming through burning oil, and saving his ship through aggressive action. 11 months later, he died in a battle where surprise didn't exist. Both sides knew combat was coming, both sides maneuvered deliberately into the engagement, and both sides accepted that close-range night action against battleships meant death for whoever stood on exposed bridges. The aircraft that bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, included Nakajima B-5N Kate bombers and Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers, launched from 6 Japanese aircraft carriers. Those carriers represented Japan's strategic offensive power, the capability to strike targets thousands of miles from Japanese bases, destroying enemy fleets before they could respond. The Pearl Harbor attack succeeded because American forces were surprised, unprepared, and unable to fight back effectively. But the same Japanese carrier force that enabled Pearl Harbor's success proved incapable of stopping American counterattacks once the element of surprise was lost. At the Battle of Midway on June 4, 1942, American dive bombers destroyed 4 Japanese fleet carriers. At Guadalcanal, Japanese carriers supported ground operations but couldn't prevent American aircraft from Henderson Field from sinking battleship Hiei. By 1943, Japanese carrier aviation had been devastated by cumulative losses of irreplaceable veteran pilots. The weapons that opened the Pacific War, Japanese carrier aircraft striking Pearl Harbor, couldn't win the war once American forces understood how to fight back. The weapons that turned the Pacific War were cruisers like San Francisco, commanded by officers like Captain Young, who charged directly into superior enemy forces at point-blank range and inflicted sufficient damage to accomplish tactical missions even at the cost of their own lives. Captain Young's 364 days between earning the Medal of Honor and dying in combat represented the Pacific War's entire strategic transformation in microcosm. December 7, 1941, surprise attack, catastrophic losses, desperate survival. November 13, deliberate engagement, calculated sacrifice, tactical victory, enabling strategic success. The officer who survived the first battle and died in the second embodied the principle that defeat teaches lessons victory never can. American naval doctrine evolved directly from Pearl Harbor's lessons. The importance of radar for night combat, demonstrated when Helena detected Japanese ships at 27,000 yards on November 13. The critical role of damage control, proven when San Francisco survived 45 hits. The necessity of aggressive tactical leadership, exemplified when Admiral Callahan ordered his cruisers to charge battleships rather than maintaining range. These principles didn't emerge from abstract planning. They emerged from officers like Cassin Young, who'd stood on burning ships, made life-or-death decisions in seconds, and understood viscerally that survival required aggressive action, not passive defense. The final irony of Captain Young's story was this. The ship that killed him, Battleship Hiei, was sunk the next day by aircraft from Henderson Field, the airfield that Young died preventing Japanese battleships from destroying. The tactical decision that cost Young his life directly enabled the strategic outcome that turned the Pacific War. American forces held Guadalcanal, maintained Henderson Field, controlled the Southern Solomons, and began the island-hopping campaign that would reach Tokyo in 1945. Destroyer USS Cassin Young sailed past Japan's home islands in August 1945, part of the fleet enforcing blockade operations in the final weeks before surrender. The destroyer bearing Young's name was present in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, when representatives of the Japanese government signed surrender documents aboard Battleship Missouri. The war that began with Commander Young being blown off USS Vestal at Pearl Harbor ended with a ship bearing his name witnessing Japan's formal capitulation. Captain Cassin Young was not an exceptional officer by World War II standards. Thousands of American naval officers demonstrated similar courage, accepted similar risks, and made similar sacrifices. What made Young's story symbolically powerful was its chronological precision. 364 days from Medal of Honor to death in combat. That single year contained the entire arc of American transformation from victim of surprise attack to architect of strategic victory. Young understood the cost of victory because he'd paid it at Pearl Harbor, swimming through burning oil while his ship exploded behind him. He returned to combat knowing exactly how deadly naval warfare had become, knowing that commanding from the bridge during surface action meant exposing himself to enemy fire, knowing that charging battleships with cruisers was tactically suicidal. He went anyway. The examination of San Francisco's shattered bridge at Mar Island Naval Shipyard provided final confirmation of what Pearl Harbor had begun teaching. American naval officers would not retreat, would not surrender, and would accept death as the price for mission accomplishment. Japanese forces could kill American captains. They could sink American ships. They could win tactical engagements, but they could not break the will of officers who'd already proven they'd swim through fire to save their ships. The final irony of Captain Young's story was this. The ship that killed him, Battleship Hiei, was sunk the next day by aircraft from Henderson Field, the airfield that Young died preventing Japanese battleships from destroying. The tactical decision that cost Young his life directly enabled the strategic outcome that turned the Pacific War. American forces held Guadalcanal, maintained Henderson Field, controlled the Southern Solomons, and began the island-hopping campaign that would reach Tokyo in 1945. Destroyer USS Cassin Young sailed past Japan's home islands in August 1945, part of the fleet enforcing blockade operations in the final weeks before surrender. The destroyer bearing Young's name was present in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, when representatives of the Japanese government signed surrender documents aboard Battleship Missouri. The war that began with Commander Young being blown off USS Vestal at Pearl Harbor ended with a ship bearing his name witnessing Japan's formal capitulation. Captain Cassin Young was not an exceptional officer by World War II standards. Thousands of American naval officers demonstrated similar courage, accepted similar risks, and made similar sacrifices. What made Young's story symbolically powerful was its chronological precision. 364 days from Medal of Honor to death in combat. That single year contained the entire arc of American transformation from victim of surprise attack to architect of strategic victory. Young understood the cost of victory because he'd paid it at Pearl Harbor, swimming through burning oil while his ship exploded behind him. He returned to combat, knowing exactly how deadly naval warfare had become, knowing that commanding from the bridge during surface action meant exposing himself to enemy fire, knowing that charging battleships with cruisers was tactically suicidal. He went anyway. The examination of San Francisco's shattered bridge at Mar Island Naval Shipyard provided final confirmation of what Pearl Harbor had begun teaching. American naval officers would not retreat, would not surrender, and would accept death as the price for mission accomplishment. Japanese forces could kill American captains. They could sink American ships. They could win tactical engagements, but they could not break the will of officers who'd already proven they'd swim through fire to save their ships. The mathematics were simple. Japan could build excellent ships, train skilled pilots, and design brilliant tactics. But Japan could not match an enemy whose officers treated death as an acceptable tactical outcome rather than something to be avoided. When American cruisers charged Japanese battleships at Guadalcanal, they weren't desperate, they were methodical. They knew the cost. They paid it anyway.
And in doing so, they transformed defeat at Pearl Harbor into victory across the Pacific.